It's my absolute pleasure to be joined again by Operator Starsky. I'm not going to go through the whole blah, blah, blah because everybody knows who OS is, so we can dispense with all of that. However, before we jump in, huge thank you to everyone who supported the channel last year to make all the events happen that we did on the ground in London, in Europe. And of course, this year we have ambitions, if anything, are greater than they were before, but none of that can happen without your support. And of course, the projects, which I'm going to ask OS about and what he's up to as well. We are very grateful, but also dependent on a degree of support from our loyal audiences. So you will find all the details in the description of the video if you are minded to give us a hand to have an impact and push back against Russian lies and aggression. OS, welcome back.
Hello, my friend. Thank you very much. Always a pleasure being here. Always a pleasure to see you, and also much love and respect to all our viewers, our dear family and friends on the other side of the screen.
Absolutely. And I was racking my brains thinking, have we already spoken this year? Because it feels like we're already 3 or 4 months into the year, but no, we're not even through January yet. This has been the slowest January of my life. I mean, it's like dog years, isn't it? We're living the equivalent kind of dog years here. A lot has happened so far. What is your, I was going to say highlight, but what I should really say, what is your low light of the year so far?
What do you mean?
What's the nadir, the trough, the bottom of the barrel, the worst moment so far?
The worst moment of the year so far.
There's a lot. I mean, you're spoilt for choice, right?
I don't even know where to start, my friend. Maybe we can start with the so-called peace talks, all right? Where we are being pushed the same freaking agenda over and over again. Nothing changed since 2022. And when White House, when there's spokespeople, when Donald Trump keeps like bragging about stopping 8+ wars, tremendous success in negotiations with Russian terrorists, security guarantees that never work, as history tells us, right, since 1994. I just feel like just turning off television and watching, I don't know, Games of Thrones or something.
Game of Thrones seems to me to be more normal than the reality we're living in there. I mean, that has some logic behind who murders who and which lies are getting told there. It seems the reality we're living in makes less sense than that does, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I agree on that. On the other hand, we all need to escape time to time, but not too far, all right? Not too far from reality. It's a bit dangerous.
The subtext then, because we did our last episode, I think we called it Pizdeal, as in Pizdiets. And that's what seems to be going on. Whatever happens, whatever sort of superficial softening towards Ukraine's position happens, and it never goes into full partnership, obviously, because Trump is not a partner to Ukraine and never has been. Um, but it always seems to revert back to Trump trying to put pressure on Ukraine to essentially not just concede, but surrender in a way. I mean, that seems to be the real direction of travel, despite the endless sort of cycles of letting up on Ukraine and then digging back down. It all reverts back to this idea that Ukraine must surrender land. I'm sure that's your understanding of it, and I get you to talk about that. But I also want to talk about how that goes down because the other narrative that we see get pushed, and this is one which unfortunately got pushed here as well, is this idea that actually Ukrainians really want peace now. They really want peace. And actually, of course, every single Ukrainian wants peace, but it's not peace at any price. And that's the bit that gets left out of the narrative and it gets endlessly amplified, etc., etc. So what's your take on those, combined narratives there? Surrender and peace.
Well, first of all, I already talked about that. All Ukrainians want peace. 100% Ukrainians want peace. And people who are watching us right now and probably think like, but wait, but why Ukrainians want to continue fighting? Maybe they're like earning money through, I don't know, selling weapons or something like that. Guys, Ukrainians live in the wartime country for soon it will be fifth year, all right, 5 years. And if you have never lived in a wartime country, you don't really understand what it means because Ukrainians want peace since the very first day of the war. All right, there is not a single clear-minded person that I can think of who actually enjoys the war. All right, enjoys being bombed and hit with missiles and drones, shelled and stuff like that. That is not a very enjoyable business, my friends. Trust me, Ukrainians don't want to continue that. Russians do, because that's basically the whole Russian ideology, and the foundation of the Russian Mir is to literally kill everyone. They're freaking death cult,
Not
but
many of them are enjoying it, let's be honest, though, but many of them are benefiting from it.
well, the main idea of going to a different country and earning money, snatching toilet, that's of course we're talking about the the Russian motivation in general to go and kill Ukrainians. But first of all, to me, the very departure point, all right, the moment when I will wear red hats and start applauding to Donald Trump will be the moment when we will see at least some kind of clear sign that Donald Trump actually respects things like international law and Ukrainian sovereignty. Because so far, since January 2024, since the day of his inauguration, we haven't seen anything like that. All right. And that is a very clear sign that he doesn't support Ukraine. Which is, again, I see a lot of commentaries on my channel, for example, like, why should we even support Ukraine, right? Like, what did Ukraine give us, all right? I'm tired of mentioning Budapest Memorandum over and over and over again because it literally makes absolutely no sense. You know,
And never mind all the grain and the breadbasket of the world and etc. Let's not mention any of that.
Okay, I can talk for hours about that. I can talk about Ukrainian soldiers that after that horrific terrorist attack of 9/11, when United States called its NATO allies, Ukraine that wasn't even member of NATO sent thousands of Ukrainian soldiers to demine the roads to make sure that their American friends and brothers are safe, right? That's what Ukrainians did, even not being part of the alliance. They sacrificed their soldiers, right, sending them to a different country, which wasn't, we had absolutely nothing to do with that. It was literally your business, dear American friends. It was your business. All right, but we felt the need to fight for the right cause, right? And even though we didn't participate in the combat operations, but we made sure that the roads are safe, that the passages are safe, the crossroads are safe, that people can walk freely and not being killed by IEDs and landmines that were found in huge numbers in the area. So I can talk about this for hours and hours straight, but there is such a thing as collective security. There is such thing as basically partnership, again, NATO partnership, because Ukraine is partnered with NATO since 1992. And many, many other things. We are allies, we are friends, but when we talk about allies, again, we should remind ourselves that we're also talking about Donald Trump, who doesn't really understand the concept of allies. He understands the concept of people he admires, which are mostly dictators and criminals, and people he despises, which are coincidentally are usually his allies.
This is it. And the idea of sovereignty, I think, is an interesting one because the other thing this year so far has told us in very clear terms is that sovereignty and the sanctity of sovereignty, which has been the bedrock foundation of much of US foreign policy since the end of the Second World War, which is that whatever happens, it will intervene with its allies to roll back or prevent the violations of sovereignty in any circumstance. So people can say there's been a lot of hypocrisy in the West, etc. But actually, this is a strand that runs through it. Freedom of navigation and trade is one, and the other one is the sanctity of sovereignty. And the US has intervened on multiple occasions to try to reinforce that. To an extent, Vietnam and Korean War can be seen on the one hand as sort of civil wars, on the other hand, they can be seen as a certain violation of sovereignty by larger communist regimes trying to destabilize them. And that's a certain violation of borders as well. And the Iraq War is a clear example. But the examples we have so far this year, whether you like Maduro or not, and of course he's a very nasty character. Well, actually, his deputy is a very nasty character as well, and she's now kept in place. What it has demonstrated beyond doubt is that we are in an era where Trump doesn't place any value on sovereign borders. And this is a very Putin-esque quality as well. The idea that you cannot be sovereign unless you can defend your borders by force. Therefore, there are the only sovereign entities, the ones with the largest armies and the willingness to project force and use it. So it seems to me he hasn't just got a problem with Ukraine, he's got a problem with all middling-sized democratic powers who he perceives as weaker than the US and its military capabilities.
I agree with you, my friend. What can we talk about with a person who literally doesn't understand the concept of international law? I literally have no idea. You know, a person who woke up yesterday and found out that there turns out there's Ukraine on the map, all right, somewhere in Europe. I can probably guarantee that before, well, let's say 2017, he had absolutely no freaking clue what Ukraine is and where it is, all right. He doesn't understand the concept of international law, why Ukrainians are fighting so bad, all right, for their sovereignty, for their freedom, survival. He literally doesn't understand all that. On the other hand, of course, he never served. He's what they call it, a draft dodger or
He's a
something like
draft
that.
dodger, yes. Captain Bone Spurs, I think, is what he's unaffectionately termed by those who have some resentment at him dodging the draft. I think he dodged it 5 times, which is extraordinary.
That's absolutely that's absolutely impressive. I don't know what to say. Yeah, but what can we talk about with a person who doesn't understand all that, who doesn't understand the situation? Very, very hard to actually speak with, not only with Trump, of course, but with people who represent Trump, like the real estate salesman Steve Witkoff, which is
Господин Витков, агент Кремля.
th that is something absolutely impressive once again, because I'm trying to understand how exactly he became an envoy, all right, for Donald Trump, and I just cannot. Most probably, that like they were sitting there in the golf club drinking margarita, and Donald Trump told him, like, dude, you are a great salesman. Go, you can do it. That it's basically the same, like I think he could be also, very, very good dentist, all right? Like he can sell real estate, he can drill teeth as well. That's very,
I
very
think
easy.
it's probably worse than that. And I'm not making any specific allegations here, but there are hints that Mr. Witkoff has some business connections in Russia. So it's not that he knew nothing about, he knows nothing about Ukraine, he knows nothing about geopolitics, but it may be worse in that let's send this guy because he has skin in the game with the aggressor. That it could be as bad as that.
Well, let's think logically, all right? Kirill Dmitriev is a Russian oligarch, businessman, a person who has access to the Russian finances, Russian funds. Witkov is also businessman, also oligarch. Why Putin sends his business person to talk to Trump's business person. That's something absolutely crazy.
This is it. And I'll have to dig into this a little bit more because, I wonder whether, here we go. Allegedly. Now, this is a good publication in the UK. It's called Byline Times. I'm quoting them rather than making a direct allegation myself. But it says here, 1st of December 2025, Steve Witkoff's real estate empire is partly bankrolled by a former advisor to Kirill Dmitriev. So it's more than it's potentially more than just a coincidence that these guys were chosen for this particular role. There we go. I'm verging into conspiracy land, but actually, none of this really is conspiracy when you understand how Russia works. What I've also noticed, we'll get onto the peace board as well in a minute because that is such a fertile area for comedy. It's just so dark and dire and ridiculous, but it's real. Before we do that, let's get on to something else that I've seen pop up over the last couple of months. And indeed, I did a few episodes with it, and I've been talking to quite a few Ukrainian journalists who look into this sort of thing. But it does seem that there are a set of journalists and historians, and I've noticed this in the UK especially, that seem to have got very active in the last couple of months. One denigrating Zelensky, and not necessarily in, I would say, a way that appears objective, but it appears more like a kind of reputational assassination campaign. So it makes me think, what is kind of going on here? There are also a number of historians and advisors, analysts, whatever you want to call them, who have really been beating the idea that you must talk to Russia. This is the mistake we're making here, that we refuse, and it's Biden's mistake. You must talk to Russia. And again, there's a certain, one can say that people are allowed their points of view and their political points of view. But again, with my deeply paranoid mind, I see certain connections in the repetition of these kind of narratives. And I've tried, but also a kind of refusal to enter into dialogue or debate on these questions, which again makes me deeply suspicious. Anyway, I'll stop talking. What do you think of these ones?
I had chance of watching, sometimes even talking to people who say that we should actually talk to Russia. And I have a question. Uh, what did we do all these times? It's like 1991. Guys, Russia was in G8. Russia was in G8 before it committed political suicide by invading Ukraine and basically got kicked out of it.
They were sort
What
of in NATO. I mean, they were advised, they had a monitoring mission and were basically brought into NATO as well to try and reduce, their inherent paranoia against it.
uh, my friend, the number of Russian personnel in the NATO headquarters was probably 2 times bigger than the number of Ukrainian personnel at the NATO headquarters all this time. Okay, we had all sorts of conversation with Russians, and what's the result? All right, so we can see the result. It's not like we need to talk to Russians. I think the problem is that we need to percept, all right, and accept the Russians for what they really are, all right, instead of what we think they are. And that is a big problem, for example, for European politicians who some of them are still thinking that Russia is like this beautiful democratic country. All right. We should really accept Russians for what they are, terrorist regime, recognized as terrorist regime in 2022. All right, by European countries. That's a necessity. I spoke to different supporters of Russia, all right, people who like promote, who lobby Russia in the social media and stuff like that. And if you dig just a bit deeper, the same people um, say that you should also have been talking to like Osama bin Laden, all right, because the United States and other countries of the evil West brought a lot of like death and destruction to those poor countries, and heroic Al Qaeda had no other choice but, to show the position of the Muslim world. Those are the people who actually think this way. They will always stick to the criminals and terrorists because that's basically their way of attracting attention, of increasing the number of views on YouTube and things like that. That's basically the only thing they're capable of doing.
Let's turn to the Board of Peace because this just has. Well, I put to a guest, this does this remind him of Spectre? And they were like, no, no, no. Spectre was far too competent to be compared to the Peace Board. But it is surely beyond a joke where you quite literally have a club where the world's largest kleptocrats and tyrants pay a hefty bribe to get in that one assumes goes straight into the crypto pocket of the Orange Monster and the White House. I mean, no scriptwriter, no thriller writer could actually make this stuff up because it is beyond insane.
Absolutely. Lukashenko, oh my God. Putin, holy crap. I think the next one will be like Darth Vader and most probably Freddy Krueger. Unfortunately, Freddy Krueger doesn't have like $1 million to pay, but he would be like, a very, very good candidate for that
That's it.
peace council.
And if they take galleons, they could have Lord Voldemort in there as well.
Lord Voldemort, 100%, but I think without Kim Jong-un, that peace board has absolutely no sense whatsoever.
I doubt whether he has a billion of anything to contribute towards that, but who knows? Um, Maybe China will help to pay his entry fee for the Great Club of Evil. And then there's Viktor Orban. Of course, he was the first pretty much to sign up. And there's Bin Salman, I think, of Saudi Arabia, or Bonesaw, as he's affectionately known. Um, yeah, it's just kind of extraordinary. Um, I think for a time, Belgium said they were going to join, and then they were strong-armed into this isn't going to be a good look, especially when they were instrumental in trying to prevent the Russian central bank funds being returned or not returned, but given over to Ukraine. But just extraordinary. I don't know what direction that's going to go in. The other story that's kind of breaking, and this is one we've got very little information on it. It seems that the Forbidden City in Beijing has been massively reinforced by security forces and troops. And this comes in the wake of an extraordinary purge of the military, the number one and the number four. But this comes after months and months where a whole swathe of senior officers have been purged out of the military. And of course, there are unconfirmed, but rumors of some kind of coup plot that's been suspended here. We can't really comment, too much on that, except that if China was to be destabilized, this is fascinating because this could cause tremendous problems to Russia, I presume at least.
I agree. I have several theories, but they're like from the land of the conspiracy theories and tinfoil hats. But I have several theories on that. That apparently some kind of superpower attempted to, recruit some of the top leadership in China and show that they can do it. All right, so they did it in Venezuela. They can do it in China as well, but something failed. But again, that's literally a conspiracy. Don't quote me on that, please.
That's it. It may even also be a story, spun up by the Communist Party in order to cover up some internal kind of issues. But how dependent do we think Russia is at this point on China, on their drone components, their tech, their financing, the purchase of hydrocarbons, gas? I mean, how dependent are they, or has that already started to kind of fall apart a little bit, which we started to see at the end of last year?
They're pretty much dependent. First of all, they don't have such access as Ukraine has to the parts for creating those drones, for assembling the drones. We are talking specifically things like motors, the electric motors. Um, at the same time, of course, we know that China is generously supplying Russian troops with their golf carts and motorbikes. Um, they are currently one of, well, I cannot call them the main supplier of weaponry to Russia. I would say that they're main supplier of components and necessary parts for the Russian drones, because the main supplier of weaponry is currently North Korea. They supply millions of shells every single year to Russia, and basically Russia turned North Korea into a big military hub for creating and producing weaponry. But in terms of technology, of course, China is leading, all right, leading at this point. On the other hand, look, Ukraine is supported and supplied by half hundred countries with combined GDP times and times larger than combined Russian and Chinese GDP. So I think that we have a small edge in this regard.
And the other topic, which I'm certainly, I know Jason Smart does a lot on this, and a lot of the conversations we have off screen, as it were, about this. But what shape is the Russian economy in? I mean, this is something that constantly gets almost forgotten about in this kind of chaos of Trump's narratives, etc., and Greenland and goodness and all this kind of stuff. But we do try to bring it back to the side that Russia is actually incredibly brittle and fragile. But of course, people are like, well, we've been saying it's going to collapse now for however many years. So, what's your view on this? I mean, is Russia both stronger and weaker than it's often portrayed or tries to portray itself as?
First of all, Russia had a very, very big resource, all right, big financial resource prepared for this specific invasion of Ukraine. We are talking about hundreds of billions of dollars, talking about gold stockpiled for this war, the so-called National Welfare Fund that they keep depleting until today successfully. But what do we mean when we say collapse? If you want to see collapse of Russian society, all right, go to like Omsk. You will see all you need, all right, in like Omsk, Ussurisk, Kolyma, of course, beautiful Kolyma. There you will see the collapse on the level of Russian society, with schools falling apart, with their kindergartens without heating, all right, and things like that, hospitals without running water, roads without asphalt because all the asphalt was stolen by evil Obama. And if you want to see the situation a bit higher, right, on the more global scale, on the regional scale, let's say, there are different indications that actually show that Russians are struggling. First of all, they shrank the preliminary payment, the bonus payments for signing the contract in the Russian military. In some regions, this payment shrank 5 times, all right, which means that they don't really have enough resources to keep paying out to its cannon fodder. Secondly, there were a lot of rumors about Russians working really, really hard on preparing the new mobilization. Those of our dear viewers there who watches, for example, Sanction Divan, they know what I'm talking about, because Sanction Divan was already warned, all right, by Russians that Russian armed forces are waiting for him. And we are talking about the mobilization of the Russian reservists that kinda will not be involved into the operations on the Ukrainian territory. But again, all right, Putin also promised that not a single Russian conscript would be involved in the invasion of Ukraine. We have captured hundreds and hundreds of those. So what does it mean? Again, it means that Putin is running out of resource of those recruits and especially the finances to upkeep supporting his meat waves with enough meat, all right? And according to different estimates, they require between 35 and 45,000 troops every single month to keep those meat waves effective. Uh, as much as we can call them effective, of course. And again, Ukrainian Minister of Defense recently stated that, yes, all right, we understand those numbers. We should be able to kill at least 50,000 Russians, not like disable, all right, not like neutralize, but literally kill 50,000 Russians a month in order to reach our goal, which is literally depleting of the manpower involved in this invasion. And I think that we can actually do that. But the problem is that I think we will actually see this mobilization coming maybe even this year, because this year we were talking about this since 2024. This year will be critical for Russia in terms of artillery, in terms of personnel, in terms of tanks, and in terms of budget.
And there's other developments, aren't there? I mean, this absolute transparency of the battlefield seems to be increasing month on month. Now, we saw some really weird tactics in November, December, which is small groups of Russians infiltrating sort of very small towns, villages. So it's not large urban centers, because they tried it in Pokrovsk and really, they haven't really, penetrated far into Pokrovsk and they've lost some ground as well. But when it comes to small villages, they seem to develop this infiltration technique, which had some relative success. But what it was being explained to me is that actually the next urban centers that they could conceivably try to target are actually there's a lot of space, there's a lot of ground in between, which of course, let's face it, is a kind of kill zone for the drone saturation and the especially the fiber optics, which Ukrainians have now, slow off the mark to adopt, but have now been adopting in greater and greater scale to the point where they can soon potentially match Russia in the fiber optic arena. So are we likely to see any movement in the battlefield, or at this point are we really seeing kind of stasis, and the resource situation in Russia means that they can't mount, large scale offensives, which in any case haven't made much progress. And what that's not being taken account in the peace process either, is it? In all this talk of surrendering territory, when actually maybe Russia does not have any capacity to physically take much more land than they currently have.
Let's uh, let's talk about this one because
Mm,
this one is very interesting. The reason why Ukrainians are killing approximately 1,000 Russians per day
mm,
instead of 2,000 Russians. The reason for that is very simple because Russians are trying to deconcentrate their troops, all right? They're trying to spread their troops, scatter them in the larger areas. So Ukrainian drones have less opportunity to strike the concentrations of Russian personnel. So they basically scatter like their platoons, even their squads. All right. So we have less chance to hit more of them. Imagine some kind of Russian strike group being concentrated in an area preparing for an attack, and that is basically a very, very happy day for Ukrainian operators, drone operators, for obvious reasons, right? We will not see anything like, those massive columns like in 2022 trying to roll through the Ukrainian towns and settlements, first of all, because of the defenses that are currently built by the Ukrainian defenders, and secondly, because it will only result in losing a lot of vehicles on the first place, and on the on the last place, the Russian manpower, which is again, Russians don't really need, because they need to constantly supply their small advances with men, all right? Even when this mobilization will be conducted, we will not see intense battles. We will only see the constant stream of people, all right, the constant stream of cannon fodder, and the Russian meat waves, those attacks involving small groups, they will be prolonged in time. That's it, not in scale, but in time. Why? Because basically this gives Russians opportunity to move forward very, very slowly, all right? Again, losing thousands of men on a daily basis, but still move forward meter by meter. Again, it will take Russians something approximately like 120, 140 years, as far as I remember the recent estimates, right, of the Russian dynamics of their offensive in Ukraine, and also combined populations of like Russia and North Korea that will be burned in those attacks if they want to take whole Ukraine. But we will see this process, all right, we will see it continuing, because currently the tactic of the small groups is something that the whole Russian doctrine is built around, all right? That is something that we can actually observe, based on Russian recruitment, based on Russian recruitment campaign in the Russian prisons and yada yada. And also the Russian campaign of recruitment in like African countries and other poor countries of the world. The whole Russian military doctrine is based around the tactics of the small groups at this point. We can forget about, glorious Russian Spetsnaz, glorious Russian descent. We are now talking literally about those meat waves that Russians will be sending towards Ukrainian positions over and over again. So that is my estimation, and that is something that we will keep seeing even in the middle 2026, until something changes. What can change? First of all, why Putin needs time on the first place? Because we can see that the popularity of the far-right movements in European countries is growing. We can see that United States, all right, the same situation we will expect in other countries if the welfare in those countries basically collapses or becomes worse than it is today. For example, in Germany, in France, in Italy, we will see those movements rising and growing, using this decreased welfare as foundation for their, political campaign, basically.
And of course, immigration. I mean, that's the other. It's welfare plus immigration combined, and the UK is not immune from that either. You can add the UK to that list as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Despite the fact that Mr. Gill was already found guilty in taking Russian money, but all right. We all know why it happens. So that is literally the reason why Putin needs more time. Putin can prolong this war as long as possible, but Ukraine is not even the main focus for him right now, because Putin understands that if he helps those far-right movements and parties grow in their popularity, grow in numbers, reach wider electorate, and also with the help of the White House, because literally cooperation with Nazi and fascist European parties is now currently the national strategy of the United States, of the White House, all right? Let's call it this way. So that is what they expect. They expect the boost of the far right movements around the world. Far left groups also take part in this, but they have just a bit different role. Okay. So that is literally the answer to your question. Putin needs time specifically to reach this goal because the more time Putin is spending on fighting in Ukraine, the more influence he reaches in European countries, which is extremely, extremely dangerous at this point.
So actually, he's probably not going to risk large-scale offensives, which exhaust his supplies faster. He's clearly, from what you've said there, not training up the bulk of his troops to have any kind of skill set in combat. That's not their role. Their role is to go in and do the minimum, really, and essentially sacrifice themselves and put pressure on Ukraine. Um, does
Uh,
Russia,
you know,
however, yeah,
I gotta say one thing. We keep forgetting that Putin is not fighting conventional war. Putin is fighting hybrid war, and one of the elements of fighting hybrid wars is utilizing all sorts of leverage, like political, economical, and yada yada yada. So we should think the way he thinks. Why would he send like his troops to the European countries, right? Immediately, I'm talking about big countries like Germany, like France. If he can literally do what he did with the United States, destabilize the society, destabilize the situation, and make people in those countries fight against each other, that's literally his strategy. The smaller countries, we're talking Baltic countries, unfortunately, those have higher chance of meeting Russian descent and Spetsnaz and so-called Russian peacekeepers.
that's it. And I was wondering whether Putin might actually, because, there's this book which I'm sure you've seen. It's called If Russia Wins. Here we go. If Russia wins. And it talks about a scenario where a Russian incursion into Narva destabilizes NATO, etc. But this seems to me, like, even this came out last year, I think that seems to me a scenario that already is several years out of date. One, the stakes are far higher than just a small chunk of NATO territory. We're talking about the existence of NATO as a very concept being challenged from within by one of its core founding members. We're talking about Greenland potentially being the target of a hostile takeover by US forces, dare I say it. That idea has very much been encouraged by Russia through various means. It's met fertile ground in Trump and in the U.S. administration, but there's certainly some evidence that it's been encouraged as a kind of psychological operation. My concern for this year, and this is if we flesh this one out, that's probably where we'll end on, is that actually while we're busy looking at a kinetic war with Russia based on probably outdated methods and platforms which it cannot afford anyway and is not geared up to fight with, we could have a full-scale hybridized war with some kind of marine confrontation. And we'll come to the marine confrontation because that seems to be starting to take shape with a US that says, well, do you know what? You won't give us Greenland, so you guys are on your own. It means we could see European airspace taken out by drones. It means we could see communications cables taken out. It means we could be essentially almost held under siege as Russian submarines start sort of taking shipping out around European coastal waters. That in itself could be enough to destabilize, as you say, the political environments. And there'll be many parties and assets and puppets set up to say, "Oh, hang on a second, World War III. Let's just give Russia." I mean, are we really going to lose all of this for, a small chunk of territory in the Donbass or this or that? You know how the arguments will then start to play out. And Russia doesn't need to deploy a single land-based unit.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a very, very high risk of such a situation actually happening because First of all, we don't really understand the Russian rules of engagement, all right? The NATO Navy don't understand the rules of engagement. Therefore, there is a very, very big risk that if another Shadow Fleet tanker is taken, then there is a very, very big risk that Russians can actually use force. So if they use force, how exactly will NATO react on that? So that is something we cannot really predict, especially considering that currently United States are not very supportive towards their NATO allies. But speaking of Greenland, I'm actually becoming a bit more optimistic regarding this. Because judging from what the European leaders were saying, again, I don't know. I don't have details on this, all right? But I suspect, again, we're talking about the conspiracies. I suspect that at some point, for example, Macron just told Trump, tete-a-tete, said, Mr. Trump, like, if you invade Greenland, we will fucking nuke you because we have nukes, all right? And that's probably something that actually made Trump, decrease his demands, his ambitions, and basically he agreed to literally establish a bunch of bases in Greenland, which he could fucking do himself
Well, they could do
without
that at any
all
point
this.
anyway. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, there are those who say, no, the whole thing was just, there was never anything in it. It was just headline grabbing, etc. I don't entirely buy that. If you listen to Malcolm Nance and some of the reporting, two battalions of Arctic trained troops were moved potentially to be in a position and readied. And the further, this is where we get into real rumor land. But this rumor suggests that actually they've been training for a kind of assault on a territory like Greenland for at least 6 months. So if there's some evidence of planning and training, at scale and over a considerable period of time, that suggests it's not just a sort of headline grabbing, short term little sort of grenade thrown into the news cycle or to influence Davos or, peak the markets so people can make a killing. That there's probably some truth in all that as well, but it suggests this wasn't just, Trump woke up one morning and thought, hey, let's take Greenland.
No, Jonathan, look, okay, let's not talk about rumors, let's talk about facts. 2016, Donald Trump said that NATO is outdated, all right, that NATO is obsolete, all right. That's his words. Way before the full-scale Russian invasion, already back then, he plus his good friends back then, like Elon Musk, they all supported this idea that we don't need NATO, we can do everything ourselves. Greenland 2025. I believe even in 2024, he was already talking about Greenland, according to Mr. Miller, all right. That was always in his freaking dreams. He said that he likes to have Greenland because it makes him feel good and stuff like that. Let's just quote Trump himself, all right? He already confirmed several times that he doesn't need NATO and that he wants to take Greenland. So I don't really know what kind of talks he had with like Macron, maybe Starmer as well. I have no idea because generally UK also have nukes. But I think that at some point Europeans showed, as much power, as much deterrence, all right, as they could show, to look menacing as much as they could. Can you imagine? I don't know. Can you imagine? Let's say, no, Poles can be menacing, 100%.
Oh, yes.
Poles can be menacing. Meloni can be menacing 200%. The way she screams in the parliament, that's something. Yeah. But I don't know. Starmer, he might be menacing, but he might be menacing in like very, very British way, like very, very gently menacing, probably something like that.
I like to think so. I suspect that he's about as menacing as someone said, being mauled by a baby lamb. But that's you know something along those lines. I suspect he's not nearly as tough. I think he probably does have a certain amount of strength in his own party to impose discipline, and he has certain tools to keep the order within his own party structure. So he's not weak in that sense, but he doesn't seem to exude strength, unfortunately, when it comes to defense and internationally. He's more, I know he has achieved quite a lot due to diplomacy, and actually a lot of pro-Ukraine Americans and Republicans are saying, oh, we actually like how this guy handles Trump in some ways. He's not, trying to crawl up Trump's back passage like Rutte obviously is. That's a slightly different approach there.
Yeah, at least he doesn't call him daddy.
Doesn't call him daddy. That's one thing to be merciful for. I don't think I could take that. It's we're in perilous waters. I think that's absolutely the conclusion from this. It's been a traumatic and abusive January. It's been appalling for Ukrainian civilians who've been frozen in their homes. We'll have a couple of people on soon who've gone through that. We'll get stories from their personal experience of how it is to sort of cope with that, as well as the increased air raids and all that kind of stuff. And now they're targeting trains. It seems that they have some kind of equipment that allows them to hone in on moving targets, whether it's some kind of autonomous or semi-autonomous capabilities in the drones. We're not quite sure yet, but that's a worrying development. But it's been all round, it feels like a very abusive and traumatic January. I can't promise anyone that's going to get better. I suspect it'll get worse before it gets better. What a way to start the year, OS.
Yeah, not the best way to start the year, that's for sure. It wasn't in my contract, I tell you that. But with that, we should still remain hopeful. And I would not say optimistic, I would say rather realistic, which means that our dear European friends watching us right now should probably think about having some kind of emergency backpacks just in case you know already, because with Russians you can expect whatever. But again, according to all the experts who understand the situation, year 2026 can actually be how to say pivotal, all right, for both Russia and Ukraine, despite the fact that Kyiv is freezing at this point. But just a few numbers, all right? So I calculated approximately 600,000 citizens of Kyiv were offered to move out of the city temporarily, all right, because of the situation, because of heating and electricity shortages and things like that. At the same time, Murmansk, uh, Taganrog, Belgorod, and Podmoskovia and other towns, right? Bryansk, Oryol, have a combined population of around 2 million people that are also freezing, and Murmansk wasn't even hit.
Yes,
So,
the Ukrainians didn't even get up that far. Yeah.
yeah, because generally
Uh,
karma exists,
it's Mur
right?
Murmansk and Primorsk because there's also a very large settlements with rocket bases and airstrips and stuff just outside Murmansk. There's quite a bit of extra stuff out there. Yeah, they were all cut off. There was the Primorsk and Murmansk. Jolly
Yes,
places at the best of times. Not really. They're fucking grim.
yeah, so looking at those numbers, there's a question who actually freezes, all right? Of course, I don't want to denigrate the sufferings of Ukrainian people because the situation is absolutely fucking insane. We have a lot of disabled people who cannot move, who should stay at home, and whether they have different equipment that doesn't work because there's no electricity. And, whoever is saying that they admire Russia, Russian officers, офицерская честь and all that crap, literally those Ukrainian civilians currently trying to keep their apartments warm and wearing, telling their kids to wear like 3 pairs of pants and sweaters and winter jackets in their kids' bedrooms. That's literally, the main targets, right, of all those Russian officers. Russians are literally a scum of this planet. They are terrorist scum of this planet, and they should be dealt with. All right, that's something we should remember as Europeans on the first place, because this threat is not just aimed at Ukraine alone. It's aimed at everybody from Poland to France to Portugal. We are all under threat.
Absolutely. What a place to end. Absolute truth of that. And let's hope it prompts the action that is required. Operator Starsky, thank you so much for coming back on.
Thank you, my friend.
I'd like to say a huge thank you to everyone who supported the channel through 2025 and all those, of course, who are contemplating supporting us in 2026. We've run many events on the ground in the UK, Europe, and indeed in Ukraine as well. And some of the images of those events are on the screen as you see this. Your assistance has been absolutely invaluable to making it happen. And in 2026, we won't be able to do this scale of activity, have this impact, or even think about having these ambitions without your help and support. There are many ways you can help. Of course, liking, subscribing, making sure you are actually subscribed to the channel, because sometimes YouTube seems to kick people off their subscriptions unexpectedly, but actually also adding comments and sharing materials around your network. It all has a tremendous impact. Now, I know many people watching this channel contribute to Ukrainian charities and do what they can, but aren't necessarily people of huge means. But if you can, if you're able to, and if you see value in this work, please do contribute if you can. We have links to Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, and even GoFundMe. That is all in the description of the video. Any support you can give will make sure that we can have not just the same level of impact this year as we did last year, but we can actually increase it. And the aim, in fact, is to double our impact this year, to go from reaching about 1.5 million people per month with our content, doubling that to 3 million, and also doing many more events to help support Ukraine, help support the concept of democracy and resilience. And as we know, 2026 is turning out to be even more dangerous than 2025 was, and the existential threat to democracy, freedom, Ukraine, those aligned with Ukraine, is greater now, perhaps, than it has been at any time since the full-scale war. Thank you for listening to this. Thank you for all of your support.